So we found out on Wednesday that Notre Dame is going to be playing in a massive game to kick off next season. But as for this year, the Irish can still accomplish everything they set out to do before it started. All that and more next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And happy Halloween, everybody. And thanks for joining me here on Thursday, October 31st, by making this your first listen of the day. You can watch this episode as well as every other episode on YouTube, or you can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. For those of you watching along on YouTube, please take a second to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Really excited about today's show. National college football writer Matt Fortuna is going to join me here in a moment to talk about some big news surrounding Notre Dame's schedule for next season. Before we do a deep dive into what lies ahead for the Irish as they attempt to close out the season 11-1 and make the college football playoff. Matt is a great friend of the program. He's been on several times before, and he's the host of another popular Notre Dame podcast, The Independent, so I always appreciate any time I get the chance to catch up with him. But before we bring in Matt, quick reminder that we will be doing another mailbag on tomorrow's show, so if you have got questions, be sure to drop them in the YouTube comments or send them my way on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. All right, let's talk to Matt. All right, it's great to have him back. Matt Fortuna from the Inside Zone makes his return to the show. So first off, Matt, thanks for coming on. There's a lot of things that I want to talk to you about today. But let's start with the big news that came out on Wednesday evening. Notre Dame is going to open the 2025 season on the road against the Miami Hurricanes. What was your reaction to the news?
Exciting, first and foremost. I mean, when you think about marquee games, marquee opening weekend games, you think of big brands, and Miami and Notre Dame are certainly among those brands. There's certainly a history there. The last time Notre Dame went to Miami, it did not turn out so well for them, but no one can deny the environment that was as live as I've seen, Miami in this era in that stadium, as far as just a home game atmosphere. And the other part of it too is we don't know what day it will be. Knowing the ACC, I would expect it to be Labor Day night, the same way the Florida State game was a couple of years ago, the same way so Florida State was Sunday. Louisville was Labor Day night a couple of years ago. It seems like the ACC has really tried to own that spot. That's not inside information. I'm sharing that just speculative on my part, but knowing that there's not a firm date for it yet makes it interesting. Maybe it's Thursday or Friday. I highly doubt that, but the guessing game will certainly commence with this news coming out today.
I'm going to be honest, I don't like it, and it has nothing to do with the matchup on the field. I think Notre Dame can and probably should beat them. I mean, who knows who is going to be on their team next year for both teams, for that matter. But were you there the last time they played at Miami?
I was not. Funny enough, I got married that week. I know that's a party foul on my end, getting married in the fall, but
you didn't miss much of that game.
I remember landing from a flight. We did a little getaway right after the wedding. I landed that Saturday, and it was like the third quarter. I saw Ian Book was in. The score was very lopsided. I'm like, what happened? And a lot happened, apparently. I mean, that was the coming out party for Miami. And, everything you hear about Notre Dame since that game was like, they just were not ready for that environment. I mean, you could debate how appropriate or inappropriate all this is as far as rivalry and hatred. But, you hear from players on that bus who were literally shaken because, they're coming in through those tailgates and into that scene, and the Miami fans are just going absolutely crazy. They're bloodthirsty. They had their best team in a long, long time, and it kind of all culminated with that performance that night.
Yeah, I don't think anyone was prepared for that. And I'm not even just talking about the players. I'm talking about the fans as well, because Miami fans were so hostile towards Notre Dame fans that I'm pretty sure that the Miami AD had to apologize to Jack Swarbrick after the fact. And I even remember hearing something about how Swarbrick basically advised some people at an alumni event to not go back to Hard Rock if both teams are ranked the next time they play, because it was such an awful atmosphere. It wasn't like, I mean, I've been to hostile road games and I've had fans chirp me and stuff like that. That's not a big deal. But there was a different level. It was not like, hey, let's get loud to script Notre Dame. It's like, no, we want to hurt anyone wearing the blue and gold. So to me, it feels like an odd place to start the season, but that's just me.
It's funny, not funny, but I want to say Tim Priester, one of the older beat writers who's been around for a while, has talked about, I think, the 89 game, right at like the height of Catholics versus convicts. And I believe him or another writer had told me in passing once, that was the first time as a journalist he actually felt unsafe at a game. Like priests were getting beer cans thrown at them. When you think of like the great rivalries and the true hatred, in many ways it starts with that era with Notre Dame and Miami. And, they haven't always been good at the same time to continue it, but they were in 2017 and looks like they will be. I mean, even if they're not, first game of the year, everyone's undefeated. I'm sure it's going to be, at the very least, an electric atmosphere, to put it nicely.
It's definitely going to be electric. And I think most of my reasoning for not liking this game is because I have no interest in going to that one now. I could not wait to get to College Station for the season opener this year, but that is certainly not going to be the case for next season. Let's start back to this year. Notre Dame is 7-1 heading into the second bye week. And if you had told me that this is where they would be before the start of the season, I would not have been surprised at all. However, the path to how they got to this point has been anything but predictable. So what do you think is the best case scenario for how this team will finish, and how does that compare to what you expected from them before the season?
Record-wise, right where I thought they'd be, just like you said. If not, I picked them to go undefeated this year, so I guess I overshot it a little bit. But it's funny and ironic in the sense of I can't think of a more deflating loss or moment just within the confines of what they had just done at A&M than to lose that NIU game. And you look back on it with clarity and with enough wins in between, and the sting of that will never go away for Notre Dame fans. I get it. But for playoff purposes, it's better than the reverse. That win over A&M, given how good A&M has been, is a better resume booster than the opposite had they lost A&M and then beat an NIU and run the table from then on out. Because, we've talked a lot about this schedule, and it's in some ways been even worse than we thought it would be, because Florida State's been horrible. USC has not lived up to their potential. The so-called marquee games have not turned out to be marquee games, with the exception of Texas A&M. And yet you look at this Notre Dame team, you look at what's in front of them, they should go 11-1. Certainly they've been bit by the injury bug, probably a little more than most teams so far. And so you worry about the depth a little bit, although, again, it has not shown itself yet. You've got a lot of freshmen playing big minutes, more snaps than they probably should have been playing or were expected to be playing this far into the season. I will say, like, my long-term outlook on this team, as far as within the confines of the season, is definitely taken a step down with the injuries. Like, I thought this was a team that could host a playoff game as a 5 seed, could beat, an ACC or Big 12 champ in a neutral site in a bowl venue, and then maybe take their chance against, a Georgia or Texas or someone who's, on another tier talent-wise, and have a chance to make a run to the semifinals, maybe even national championship game if everything went right. I have a hard time seeing that, just because the depth of the program is in a good place, but it's been tested more than anyone would have liked it to here as we have this discussion in late October, the second bye week. So I do think that, that hamstrings how far this team can go, but I do think they absolutely are capable of and should, barring any unforeseen injury, go 11-1 and be in position to, at the very least, host a playoff game. And if you're hosting a playoff game, you should win that game. You will be favored to win that game.
Yeah, I felt after Benjamin Morrison got hurt, I was like, I think that's the one that finally puts a cap to this season. Well, it definitely significantly hurt their chance of winning a playoff game. But now when you consider all the different matchups, I think that there's a world where Notre Dame could be matched up against like a Clemson or a Boise State or someone in the first round, and they could potentially win that game. But looking beyond that, I don't see like a super deep run, because you're right, the injuries have been such a just brutal part to the season. It's not just that, it's at key positions too, like left tackle, defensive end, and your number one cornerback. Like, that's a really tough place to be. And for all this talk about the Northern Illinois loss, and while that is extremely embarrassing and it's like a black eye in the program, I think if you gave me two options before the season, like option A was that Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois like they did, but they only suffer, let's say, one season-ending injury, or option 2, they have all the same injuries, but they beat Northern Illinois and they're undefeated at this point in the season, I would have taken the former. Like, do you see my point?
Yeah, no, I understand it. And A&M's been so much better than I thought they would be, just based
Yeah.
off what we saw in week one. And that's not to take away from Notre Dame, but they lost. They were favorites at home. They lost by double digits in the opener. First year coach, the quarterback was underwhelming, at least in that game. And you just didn't know what was going to come of this program. And I would, as great as it is for Notre Dame that A&M has not lost since, it's the SEC. We've seen upsets every week. There's no undefeated team in the SEC remaining, at least, including on conference. I could see an A&M losing to South Carolina this week. I really could. I may look like a fool, after that game because A&M is the better team and should win it. But I do think the same way Tennessee lost at Arkansas, the same way we've seen, Vanderbilt take Texas to the limit and beat Alabama. I don't know if A&M's so good that they're upset proof in that regard. And obviously everyone's got that game against Texas at the end of the year circled. That's going to be a big one. They'll probably be underdogs in that one. But Notre Dame needs A&M to keep winning, to keep that resume up and to be in position to get a home playoff game. I mean, I didn't think we'd be talking this way after the NIU loss, but I think there's no question they're in at 11-1. It's a matter of what seed will they be. And I'll be very curious to see the first rankings on Tuesday. Notre Dame is 8 right now in the AP. They're 9 in the coaches. That's the difference between hosting and playing on the road in the first round. But they're also in front of every Big 12 team. And you're going to have a Big 12 team among those top 4. Miami would be in that top 4 as well as an ACC team, assuming they win this weekend. And so what's the domino effect of that, right? With Notre Dame. I mean, does A&M lose this week to South Carolina? Does Ohio State lose to Penn State? Does Oregon maybe lose at Michigan? I don't think so they do, although I think that's not a game that Oregon can take for granted. I think there are a number of games this week that will significantly impact where the Irish stand on Tuesday.
Right, and the debate about where Notre Dame should be ranked has already started. I mean, you got Iowa State and BYU fans. They're pissed that Notre Dame is ahead of them with the loss. And to be honest, I'm not really here to debate resumes at this point in the season because it's a waste of time. Like, we could go around and around and around. But if you look at the best teams in college football today, how many do you think would be favored over Notre Dame if they played tomorrow on a neutral site?
How many?
Yeah.
I mean, let me ask you this. I don't know. I mean, if they played A&M tomorrow on a neutral site, what's the line?
People really like A&M.
I
think it'd be
they
Texas
really
A&M
before they ever did anything.
True. So I think with their buzz lately, I think if they did it tomorrow, I think the line would probably be A&M -1. I would disagree with that, but I think that's probably what the line would be. I think if you look at it, I mean, Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, probably Texas. I think those are 4 right away. I could be like, yeah, they're going to be favored over Notre Dame. But then after that, I think, Tennessee probably like slightly, although I don't think Tennessee is that good. I think that's my point is there's like 4 teams. I'm like, yeah, they're probably better than Notre Dame, but then it kind of gets dicey.
I'm with you. I mean, I'm sure there are odds makers who could draw this up for us. I mean, if you're looking at like who's better than Notre Dame and who I don't think Notre Dame would beat if they play tomorrow, it's Georgia, it's Texas, it's Oregon, it's probably Ohio State. I think Miami and Clemson would be favored, but I think Notre Dame could and should beat both of them. So, like, is it teams that Notre Dame can't beat, or I would not pick them against no matter what? It's Texas, it's Georgia, it's Oregon, it's probably Ohio State. Although I think if Ohio State loses the second game, things can go off the rails there pretty quickly. But as far as Vegas, I think there are probably a number of teams that would be favored over Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I truly feel like if Notre Dame was fully healthy with the way that they're playing right now, specifically on offense, I think that they could beat all of those teams that you just mentioned, because Oregon looked beatable at a certain point this year. Texas has certainly taken a step back ever since the Quinn Ewers injury. He just has not looked like himself. But I think that's maybe the most frustrating thing about this season is like everyone does feel gettable. I don't know if this is going to be a trend. I know some people have pointed to the fact that, with NIL and the transfer portal, there's going to be more parity than ever. Like maybe this year for sure, but I don't know. We'll wait and see on that one. But I do think the fact that Notre Dame could realistically beat anyone on any given day is certainly a good place to be, because that's not something I expected to say after like the win over Miami, Ohio. But Marcus Freeman has been under a ton of pressure since that loss to Northern Illinois. Rightfully so. It was embarrassing, but I think that the way he's been able to right the ship up to this point has been impressive. He still has a very important 4-game stretch ahead, so I don't want to say, oh, wow, like great way to bounce back, because they could still definitely trip up. But I'm curious because I understand how most Notre Dame fans feel about him. Not to say that everyone's on the same page, but what is the perception that you've gotten about Freeman from whether it be other coaches in the sport, people who cover it that are outside Notre Dame? What do they think of him?
I think for the most part they love him. Obviously, you can't have these stinkers that seem to be an annual occurrence against group of 5 teams. But the part, and you hit on this a little bit as you were talking there. You didn't think they'd be in this position after the Miami of Ohio game, and you probably wouldn't think they'd be in this position if I told you before the year that Benjamin Morrison was out for the year. It reminds me of like 2018, right? Julian Love goes down. I know that's only one game, but it was like, all right, there goes any chance they ever had of being Clemson, right? Like that game was over, and Clemson, sure enough, made sure of that over its next 2 drives. I think the level of talent on this roster right now, even if it doesn't show up on paper in recruiting rankings the way we thought it would when Marcus Freeman took over, I mean, just look at how many dudes are out there, freshmen, sophomore, guys who are making big plays, playing extended snaps and making a difference so early. We saw that in camp when some of these freshmen jumped out immediately and earned starting spots. And I think that more than anything else is the biggest indicator and validation of the direction this program is going in. Even some of the old heads that he brought in, like Rod Hurd, you expect when you bring in a 6-year senior with starting experience, he's going to start no matter what. You don't expect Adon Schuler to come in and start at that position from week 1. You don't expect Leonard Moore to leap Jaden Mickey midseason as a freshman, right? If you looked on paper and saw this Notre Dame roster, particularly that secondary, which I believe is down to 3 healthy scholarship cornerbacks, and 2 of whom are true freshmen, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's not a recipe for success on paper. That's never been a recipe for success in Notre Dame. And yet you watch them play the way they have so far without Morrison, and you're thinking, these guys are really, really good. Like, they should beat their next 4 opponents. No question about it. Like, I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying another injury couldn't happen and all of a sudden they got to dip into the reserves even more than they have. But there's no doubt in my mind at full strength, at the strength they're at right now, Notre Dame should and probably will beat their next 4 opponents.
We're going to be right back with Matt in a moment, but before we do, I want to tell you about a great new promotion courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place, so when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And if you're looking for a winner with that $5 bet, I've got one for you. I am taking the Houston Texans plus 1.5 against the New York Jets tonight on Thursday Night Football. I know this feels like a trap line considering how bad the New York Jets have been lately. The fact that they're favorites, like they're giving you that Texans cover. Well, you know what? I'm taking the bait here. I believe the Houston Texans are going to win outright, so I am taking them plus 1.5 against the Jets. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. When you look at the season as a whole, obviously Riley Leonard and his development has been the biggest story of any one single player. Now I think they're in a spot with Riley Leonard where he's so good as a runner. He's always been that. And now he's done enough as a passer to think like, okay, this can be more than just a functional passing game. This could actually be something explosive. So what do you make of Riley Leonard's season so far? Just starting off, getting that win against Texas A&M, and then the brutal performance against NIU to now where he's at a point where this is, I guess to me, the best I've ever seen him throw.
Yeah, I mean, that A&M game I thought, was a gutsy win. It was a senior-led win, if you will. Like, he made the mature plays, which aren't always the plays you expect from your $1 million quarterback, so to speak, but he didn't turn it over. I don't know if you were in the building that night or not, but even if you're just watching on TV, it just felt like that place was looking for one reason to just explode and just jump down the visitors' throats and just like suffocate them, right? And Notre Dame never gave them that. That defense was so sharp all night. And for as much as that offense struggled, they never turned the ball over. They never made a dumb play. Like, they kept everything in front of them. And in the fourth quarter, when it came down to it, Notre Dame was a better conditioned, deeper team and was able to rattle off 10 points and punctuate a victory. Fast forward to week 2, they didn't necessarily put Riley Leonard in the best position to win. especially in that final drive where he's making that throw that gets intercepted and ends up costing the game. So it hasn't been like a linear growth the way we expected it. Like he hasn't gotten better every single week, but he's certainly gotten better since that first bye week. I mean, first 4 games of the year, he had 1 touchdown pass. Last 4 games, he's had 7. It's just been a lot different. It's been a lot sharper. It's been a lot better. And we had Ian Book on our show last week, and it was interesting hearing him as a guy who's been in and out of NFL camps the past couple of years, and as a guy who was a 3-year starter at Notre Dame, and him saying like, look, I cannot relate to these guys. Like, maybe I can through my mini camps or my camp tryouts with NFL teams, but he's like, it took me 3 years to really master the playbook, right? Where you're in sync with your OC and you know what he wants to call before he even calls it. He's like, it's just not possible to do all that in 1 year. And this isn't a Riley Leonard issue. This is a college football issue, right? Where you're seeing 1-year rentals at that position. And, in some cases, I think you're seeing guys who are not ready when they get into the NFL for that reason. It's a lot to ask of him, even more so when you remember the fact that he did not have much of a spring practice at all with these guys. So when you view it through that lens, I think he's on the right track. It hasn't, again, always gone exactly according to plan, but you can't question that guy's heart. You can't question that guy's toughness. I don't think you can question his leadership ability. I mean, I think he's beloved in that locker room, and I think those guys will lay in traffic for him if push comes to shove. So I think everything is going in the right direction. You just got to keep him healthy, protect that body as much as you can, and continue to build off the passing game the way you've been able to the last 4 games.
How many defensive coordinators would you take over Al Golden right now?
Sitting DCs? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can't think of – if Brent Venables was a DC right now instead of a head coach, maybe Brent Venables, but he's not. So, yeah, I mean, I'm drawing blanks.
Exactly. I think that's the point here is he has done such a great job since he took over. And if you think back to when he got hired, it wasn't like anyone was saying that's a bad hire, but it was certainly one that kind of caught people by surprise when there was that long delay. Because you're like, why doesn't Notre Dame have a defensive coordinator yet? And they're like, oh, well, he's coaching on one of the teams that's going to be in the Super Bowl. And now here we are. He has led Notre Dame to another great season on defense.
His return to Miami next year, if he's still at Notre Dame, there's another element.
That's right. It's so weird that he was the head coach at Miami.
So weird. So weird. And look, you don't turn down that job if you get it, especially from Temple. But I just remember when he got it, I'm like, Al Golden, Miami? Like, that just...
Yeah, didn't he get a raw deal too? They weren't transparent about all the sanctions, right?
Yes.
He just walked into a complete buzzsaw. Yeah, I think the thing about Freeman is like he definitely has his faults. There have been multiple times throughout the season where he's made a decision in game where I'm like, man, I don't know about all that. But then again, with the people that he surrounded himself with, getting a guy like Al Golden, keeping Mike Mickens around, same with Dylan McCullough, and then Mike Denbrock this offseason, I think that shows, I don't know, maybe growth, understanding of what he does and what he doesn't know, because I think at this point in time, who knows what could happen at the end of this season. But I truly believe, when I look at what Notre Dame has on its staff as a whole, this is one of the best coaching staffs in all of college football.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I think the ESPN broadcast during the Navy games relayed a conversation that they had with Al Golden when they said something to the effect of, what made you want to come back to college football? And he said, I didn't come back to college football. I came back to Notre Dame. And even, I like you and everyone else had a similar reaction when they hired him, just kind of, okay, like his last showing at the college level wasn't all that memorable. Is this a great hire? And even then I'm thinking, well, he just got out of the NFL. His family's still in Cincinnati. Is he just going to go back to the NFL for a DC job after a year? And look, they locked him up to by coordinator terms, a long-term deal after last year. I believe it was a 4-year deal. Same deal they signed Mike Denbrock to when they pried him out of LSU. And from my understanding, he really likes it there. What's not to like if you're him, right? I mean, he's had great defenses each of the last 2 years. I think when you look at the young talent, even if it's shown in places we didn't expect it to this year, you automatically start to feel better about next year's team as well, as much as this was a 5th and 6th year senior laden group where you kind of felt it was all in and, we'll pick up the pieces next year. I think you already start feeling much better about next season. And yeah, we'll see what the market, is, so to speak, for him, whether it's whether there's a head coaching job that is appealing to him, whether there is a defense coordinator job or maybe NFL head coaching job that is appealing to him. But, there's no question he's been a home run hire at the DC position for Notre Dame. And, you're seeing that even more so now with all the injuries and just how dominant they've been defensively.
And that leads me to the last question I have for you, because Notre Dame would not have been able to retain Al Golden and they would not have been able to hire Mike Denbrock unless the university was willing to spend some serious money. And they did. And I've always appreciated your honesty about the university's buy into the football program. I thought you were right to question the previous regime and for using the shopping down a different aisle excuse when it came to recruiting. And I thought you were very honest about the buy-in to the football program from the powers that be, I guess lack thereof. But now it seems like they are more willing to do what it takes to win in the modern era of college football than ever before. They have 2 NIL collectives. They pay their assistants well. They're building a brand new football facility. But what is the next big step you would like to see from the university that would demonstrate they are willing to compete with the big boys in this new era?
Yeah, not only those 2 coordinators you mentioned, Tyler, but I mean, Mike Mickens was pursued very heavily by USC, and Notre Dame fought to keep him, and they did. And Chad Bowden, I believe his title is general manager now, or he was, I believe, being pursued for a general manager position at Michigan, and Notre Dame up the ante to keep him as well, which would have been, both those would have been big losses. So yeah, Notre Dame's all in it to win it now, right? I mean, for all the New York Times op-eds we saw from the last president about how we'll take our ball and go home if it comes to paying players. No, like they're doing what they need to do to win. I think that's refreshing to see. I don't see any pushback from any of the fan base or even anyone from the university side when it comes to, going all in, because a healthy Notre Dame football program is healthy for the University of Notre Dame. As far as what's next, we'll see, right? I mean, I think you got to monitor the market, you got to monitor the landscape. And I'm curious to see not just Notre Dame, but just college football in general. I just think with this calendar, and it's funny, I was with my brother last night, and he's a casual college football fan, and I was describing the calendar to him, and he's like, am I an idiot, or are they idiots or are they stupid for having things the way they are right now? You've got signing day on December 4th, if I'm not mistaken. You've got the portal opening December 9th. You've got first round playoff games December 20th. And you know that everyone who's going to get fired is going to get fired during or before that time, which is just going to create more chaos as far as transfer portal, recruiting guys, recruiting assistants to another staff, because it's not, if you're playing the national championship game this year, you're playing on January 20th. If you're a new staff, you're probably going to have your staff, or a new coach somewhere, you're probably going to have your staff in place before January 20th. You're probably going to have your signing class for the most part in place before January 20th. I look at a team like a Georgia or Texas, which is loaded with 5-stars, and if those 2 programs are making deep playoff runs, if you're a 5-star backup on those teams, are you really going to sit there and go not playing with your team the whole time when, let's say, Florida or some other blue blood has an opening and they're offering major money for you to come and play immediately? I don't know. And where does Notre Dame fit into that? I've said from the beginning of this season, I think culture and depth are going to win out above all when it comes to winning a national championship this year. I don't know or don't think Notre Dame is deep enough to do that this year. But I do think it gives a program like Notre Dame, even a program like Penn State, where you saw a backup quarterback come in last week and shine, a chance to survive longer than maybe they would have in the last system, just because I think it's going to come down to a numbers game. It's going to come down to attrition. It's going to come down to want to. And I think the want to is there with Notre Dame. And from everything I've gathered about the new regime, just from the staff and people around the football program, it's, hey, if it doesn't work out for us in the playoff this year the way we hope it does, we know these guys are going to give us what we need to go out and improve ourselves, right? If we lose to Georgia because they've got much better receivers than we do, or whatever it is, we will have the means to take care of that this cycle around. And I think seeing how Notre Dame follows through on that moving forward and seeing what they do to keep these assistants, who are probably going to be more attractive than ever this time around, is going to be very interesting.
So real quick, do you think that there's going to be more of a willingness to accept undergraduate transfers that didn't go to Northwestern or Harvard?
I would think so. I mean, that's the next step, right? And I'm not as in the weeds with the push-pull of the missions in athletics, but I do know the relationships are being made or continuing to be made there under the Freeman regime in a way that they really weren't under the Kelly regime. And that's not to blame it all on Brian Kelly and Marcus Freeman. I think the school itself has come around to things much better as well.
You can read all of Matt's work on the Inside Zone, and you can listen to him with another friend of the program, Pete Sampson, on the Independent Podcast. It was great to catch up with you, Matt. Thanks again for your time. And even though I cannot possibly root for the Yankees in the World Series as a Guardians fan, I hope you enjoyed Game 5. So get out of here. Go check it out.
Thanks, buddy. Anytime.
Today's episode is also brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, which is why they have created the Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, the energy shot made just for super fans like us. The fans who are first in the parking lot and who are the last to leave. We see you. You know what else gave me a bit of Notre Dame fan fuel this past week? The moment when Jeremiah Love broke off a 64-yard run to the house to basically put the game away against Navy. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're preparing for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with the 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. That'll do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Remember, we got a mailbag coming your way tomorrow, so this is your last call to get your questions in. You could drop them in the YouTube comments, or you could send them in on social media, on X at Locked On Irish, or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Also, be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast, and I will see you on Friday.